They were obviously portraits. We speculated as to whether they were enemies or whether they were ancestors or what they were, family portraits. But they were strange because, so far as we knew at that point, nobody had ever discovered this sort of portraiture on the actual skull. So they were quite unusual. None of us had ever seen such a thing before.
But there was far more to it than that. By looking at the layers of earth ancient objects are buried in, archaeologists can tell what they were used for. In the past, when archaeologists had found buried bodies, the layers had always shown that they were in special burial grounds.
But when they came to look at the layer where the skulls had been found, they discovered something that astounded them. The layer clearly showed that the skulls hadn't been tucked away in some sort of cemetery, but lodged above the floor of someone's home, someone's living space.
9,000 years ago, decorated skulls would have been kept in people's houses. And just as the experts began to wonder what this meant, they noticed something else.
Take a look at the underside of the skull. It's smooth and flat. So what, you might think? Well, that's the crucial key to unlocking the mystery of these skulls, because they weren't intended just to lie flat. They were specially designed to stand upright, perhaps on the floor of someone's house, or more likely in some special alcove or niche. It was an astonishing revelation, because it meant that these skulls, the earliest images ever of dead people, had been made to be seen by the living.
But archaeologists were to discover that Jericho wasn't the only place where there were skulls like these. Over the decades that followed, as archaeologists excavated elsewhere in the Middle East, they discovered more decorated skulls at other sites. And it wasn't just the Middle East. Thousands of years ago, ancient artists had also created decorated skulls in what's now the Ukraine. And it wasn't all in the past either, because indigenous people in modern-day Southeast Asia were also decorating the skulls of their dead.
Archaeologists realized that this seemed to be a sort of biological instinct, a human predisposition to decorate the skulls of those who'd already died.
What had driven people so far apart in time and place to do this? What had compelled them, just like us, to decorate their homes with images of their dead ancestors? Compared to all other creatures on Earth, there is something unique about human beings that may provide an answer. It's to do with the way that our mind works.
All animals take action to avoid their own deaths. It's something that we humans share with even the smallest creatures.
But this is just the basic evolutionary instinct to survive, to try to avoid being killed.
Human beings have got something else. We humans are the only creatures who understand the inevitability of our own death, the fact that we just can't escape it. And unlike other animals, we've got a brain that's powerful enough to imagine a world in which we're no longer alive.
And there is a group of experts who believe that this helps explain why humans surround themselves with images of death. They aren't archaeologists, but psychologists, based in Arizona.
I remember being 8 or 9 years old and my grandmother dying and my mom saying, "Oh, come say goodbye to Grandma because you'll never see her again." When I thought about why that was so difficult for me to bear, it was because I realized by inference that that would be me at some point. Only human beings are explicitly aware of the fact that they someday die.
You know, just a powerful problem that humans have to face, their knowledge of their own inevitable death, and how that sort of violates so much of what we're doing day to day. We're trying to stay alive, we're trying to thrive, and yet we know inevitably it'll be thwarted.
It's a terrifying thought that the one certainty in life is that we're all going to die and there's nothing we can do about it. But these psychologists believe there is a way of easing this fear, a way of trying to come to terms with our own death.
The first uniquely human way of accomplishing this is art. That what art does is to take the natural world and to give us some control over it.
So, by creating images of our ancestors, we're reassuring ourselves that death isn't so bad after all.
That is the psychological impetus for its creation. You know, your father and your grandfather and your mom and your grandmother are still very much with you, even though they don't appear to be moving around as much as they did in the past.
It's an interesting theory. But could it be true? Professors Solomon and Greenberg decided to run an experiment to try to discover what's happening in our minds when we see images of death. They began by taking 2 groups of American students. The psychologists made one of these groups think about death, but without them knowing it. And they did it by showing them these words: rose, sneaker, fajita, flower. See anything else? Well, you wouldn't, because it was too quick for television to pick up. Let's slow it down. Between the words, the psychologists flashed the word dead. Each subliminal image lasted just a fraction of a second, but long enough to put the idea of death into the subconscious minds of the subjects. The psychologists then showed both groups of people a series of pictures. They were images of famous dead Americans, icons who would have emotional value for the subjects. Like past presidents, George Washington and JFK. Or screen stars. The subjects then chose how long they wanted to look at the pictures. Time, which was measured. What the psychologists discovered was remarkable. The group who'd been made to think about death wanted to look at the pictures for significantly longer than the group who hadn't. It seems to show that if we're thinking about our own death, we gain reassurance by looking at images of those who've already died. So, how does this help to explain the decorated skulls? Well, 9,000 years ago, Jericho was a death-ridden place.